got it off the dock, getting rope out of the wheel. Swim in to cut rope out of the propeller, and couldn't get myself back out of the water just because all my strength had drawn away. And that was in a late October, early November, where the water was still fairly warm, around 50 degrees. And within being in the water for not even 5 minutes, it had sapped all my strength away.
My brother had an accident in a canoe and drowned of hypothermia. And he went out and they tipped the canoe, and he tried, what I heard from his friend, that they held on for a while. They didn't know what to do because they were so far out and it was getting dark. And they decided to swim in. When you have hypothermia, you get very tired and you think you hear things. His friend said that he thought he heard him behind him coming along, and he wasn't. And he got up on shore and collapsed, and my brother was still out there.
Hi, my name is Sue Barnes, and I'm a wilderness EMT, and I teach wilderness medicine to people all over the country, especially in New England, down in Florida, Wisconsin, and places out west. I'm here to talk to you today about hypothermia, and that is the lowering of the body core temperature of 98.6 degrees. Our bodies don't tolerate lowering our temperature very much. Our brain doesn't function very well, and we run into all sorts of problems very early on. Let's use a scenario where you go out in the morning and it's a cool day and you paddle real hard for an hour or so, and then you kind of realize that you're starting to get sort of damp and you're feeling a little bit chilled. At this point, you're probably entering the initial stages of hypothermia. Some things to consider here are your judgment. Your judgment becomes impaired, and that can be very dangerous for you because it's a very subtle situation and you do not realize what's happening. You become more withdrawn, more apathetic about what is going on. Your extremities, your hands, your feet begin to cool off, they begin to get numb. It becomes difficult to do fine motor skills, just such as zipping up a jacket, undoing a life jacket. All of those things become more difficult. You eventually begin to become stiff. Even your big motor muscles become very stiff. You need to stop right away and to assess what's going on. Think about how do I feel right now, and take some actions. If you are wet, get dry clothing on. Make sure that you've got windproof, waterproof layers on so that you're not getting wet from the spray of the water. And also eat something, because your body needs fuel to burn in order to get warm. The other thing you definitely need to do is drink a lot of water. Drinking water helps to burn off the food that you eat to create energy to keep you warm. Drinking water is essential to avoiding hypothermia. In the previous situation, if you weren't able to take action when you were damp and cold, you'll begin to shiver more. Your judgment will become very, very impaired, and this is an extremely dangerous situation. Stop right away, assess what's going on, put on dry clothes, cover yourself up, windproof, waterproof layer, put a hat on if you can, eat some food, drink some water, and get to shore. If you get to the point where you are shivering violently and you're having a hard time controlling your paddle, it's imperative that you get to shore immediately so that you can take more advanced actions that I'm going to show you next. Once you've recognized that you're mildly or moderately hypothermic and you're able to make it to shore, you can now get out of your boat and go ahead and proceed with putting on clothing and getting yourself warm. Jan's going to demonstrate for us. She's going to reach down into the hatch here, and she's going to pull out a dry bag with some essential things that you should bring no matter where you're going and how long you're going to be out for. As soon as Jan gets out of the kayak, the first thing that she wants to do is to take her life jacket off real quick, and then go ahead and remove any damp or wet layers that she needs. Water's just going to pull heat away from your body, so you got to get those wet layers off, even if it's underwear. She's going to take a layer off here, and then she's going to reach into a dry bag and pull out some dry layers of fleece. Let's cover up her top first, and then she can throw a hat on, which is going to eliminate a lot of heat loss from her head. You can lose up to 50% of your heat through the top of your head, so it's really important to put a hat on as quick as possible. If her legs were wet, she'd go ahead and remove any layers from her legs and put some additional layers onto her legs to keep her lower part of her body warm. She's also going to want to put on a windproof, waterproof layer, and she's got a nice jacket to do that with. And if she's got any sort of gloves or anything like that, she can go ahead and put those on as well. The PFD acts as an excellent insulating layer even though it's wet. Now that she's got a windproof, waterproof layer over the top of her, I'm going to have her go ahead and put the PFD back over her because that's going to help to keep her warmer. As soon as Jan has all of her layers on, she's going to want to go ahead and feed her furnace by eating food and drinking a lot of water, some quick carbohydrates, granola, candy bar, high energy bars. Those things are going to be terrific for her. Once she does that, she's going to want to get moving as best she can. She can jump in place or move around, move her arms, get her skin circulating so that she generates more heat through exercise. Right now she's increasing the rate at which her metabolism burns food, which is just going to make her warm faster. The faster she moves, the warmer she's going to get. If Jan were not able to move around as quickly as she is right now because the stages of hypothermia became more advanced, her muscles were stiffer, she'd have a hard time exercising. So once she gets into dry clothing, she wants to go ahead and wrap herself around and insulate herself from any way that she can lose heat. So we've got a small tarp here that she's just going to wrap around herself and her head to try to minimize that heat loss. She's also going to stand on top of the dry bag here because that will help to minimize the heat loss from the ground. She needs to go ahead and drink lots of water, eat nice sweet things that dissolve real quickly, and the most important thing she needs to do at this point is she needs to call for help, to signal for help or call for help if she's got a cell phone, whatever way that has been discussed in the past. If Jan were at the point where she couldn't walk for help and her brain was not working the way it should, she made bad judgment calls, she could eventually fall into a stage of severe hypothermia where she would just stop shivering. People who are severely hypothermic are cold to the touch, they're barely breathing, you may not detect that they're breathing, and you may not even detect that they have a pulse. In this situation, the person will appear to look dead. There's not much that you can do to rewarm this person out in the environment that they're in. Wrap them as warmly as you possibly can, handle them very, very gently, and evacuate them to a hospital setting. It's unlikely that Jan would allow herself to go that deeply into severe hypothermia. A more likely situation in a kayak setting is that someone falls into the water, does not have adequate thermal protection, or is in very cold water for an extended period of time. This person becomes severely hypothermic in a fairly short period of time.
When you're paddling during the early part of the season or in areas that have cold water year-round, you must have thermal protection against the water temperatures. You can die from hypothermia. It's the greatest threat that there is to kayakers. One way that you can prevent hypothermia is with proper clothing. We're not talking fashion here. We're talking about layering clothing to buy you time in case you're immersed in cold water. One of the best ways to get thermal protection from cold water is with a wetsuit. Most paddlers prefer to have about a 3mm wetsuit. That buys you some extremely valuable time and can mean the difference between being able to get back into your boat safely and get back to shore or having a very bad day. One of the things you should consider is underneath the wetsuit is wearing a layer of some sort of thermal underwear. And that is a thin layer of wicking material that will keep you warm even when it's wet. On top of your wetsuit, you should be wearing some sort of windproof, waterproof layer, a paddling jacket, and possibly paddling pants as well. And don't forget to put the hat on. You lose a lot of heat through your head, and having a hat on can make a tremendous difference. As the water gets colder or you're traveling further from shore, you might want to consider a dry suit. The dry suit is the ultimate protection against cold water. It doesn't offer any thermal protection like the wetsuit, but it does keep you completely dry. It's still important that you wear some sort of layer underneath your dry suit so that you'll have some protection from the cold water. But having a dry suit on, which has latex gaskets at the wrist, the ankle, and the neck, does not allow you to get wet at all while you're inside the dry suit. One of the things you'll also need to be cautious about is when you decide what type of clothing you might need for protection from water temperatures. There's no hard and fast rule that above this water temperature you're fine and below this water temperature you need to wear a wetsuit or a dry suit. It's not that simple. There are many factors that come into play. How skilled you are at getting back into your boat, how fatigued you may be, whether you have other kayakers close at hand, whether the water is moving and thus will chill you down even faster at a given water temperature, whether you're hydrated or not. All of these things come into play, so there's no easy rule for this. However, one thing you might consider is that if you're going to be in water that you could not comfortably swim in for at least 20 to 30 minutes, and by comfortably I mean not lose any manual dexterity or become clumsy at any point, and still feel confident you could do the technique that will get you back into your boat. If you can be in water for 20 to 30 minutes and still feel comfortable about that, then maybe you don't need protection from the water temperatures in fairly protected conditions. But remember what your conditions are. If you're out far offshore in very exposed conditions, you actually may be faced with a situation where you'd be out of your boat more than 20 to 30 minutes. So even this hard and fast rule may not be one you could take to the bank.